How's everyone holding up the snow? Thumbs up.
It's not the worst snow I've seen.
uh, we
I love the cold. It's benefiting me.
okay. All right. It ended up. It's better than what it we got a lot for sort of right now. Like it was out there. So we just bought a house, and so I've been having to be out there and shovel and snow blow and things like that. So this is a whole new situation. There's a whole new additional layer of complication with stuff. So cool. All right. Well, enough about me and my weekend woes. We'll jump into stuff people will keep logging on right now. Any questions about where we're at, where we're headed, anything like that? Feeling all right with stuff? Okay, so we've got Quiz 5 is coming up on Wednesday. We'll have SI session tonight. Samantha, are you there in the audience?
Yes.
All right, you want to make an announcement?
Yep, we just have SI tonight again. It'll be at 6:30 like usual, and I'll get the worksheet and everything posted after class. I just want to make sure that I get all the information on there, like up until the quiz. So tonight at 6:30, and I will see everyone there.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So if you're able to go through and attend, make sure that you go through and do that. Samantha's going to have sort of great stuff for you. So jump in on that. Also, remember that we're going to have our review session on tomorrow at 5. Just like we always do, I'll go through and send out a reminder there. Remember to come in with questions, stuff that you are not quite clear on in terms of things, and we'll go through and get you squared away. All right? Any questions about that before we jump into lecture material?
Dr. Clapp?
Yeah.
Are you going to post Friday's video?
Yeah, I did. So I had family in town, and so got a little bit delayed on there. Got it posted up there this morning, and so it's up. Video is up either through the video archive link or down in the schedule. So it's up there. Thanks for being patient on that. Thanks, Maya.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, cool. Let's jump into material. Okay, cool. So we finished up last time with Maslow. Okay, talked about hierarchy of needs. The idea in Maslow's model that we need to have some basic physiological needs met before we can move up the hierarchy. And as we go through and get these lower order needs met, we're able to start to address higher order needs. And if we get through physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging and esteem, then we hit self-actualization. And we spent the last part of last lecture talking about self-actualization, this idea that this is kind of where people are able to achieve their highest level of functioning, and only a very, very small, in Maslow's model, only a very small number of people actually sort of achieve self-actualization. But once you're here, it's kind of top of the mountain, right? Going through, but we can only get here once we have all these other lower order needs met. So again, for the humanistic folks that we're talking about, Rogers focusing on relationships, Maslow focusing on different levels of needs for achieving, sort of being the best that you can be. Okay. So going to finish up with contributions and limitations of the humanistic perspective here. In terms of contributions, again, one of the most enduring and impactful sort of set of ideas and approaches particularly within clinical and counseling psychology. This stuff on hierarchy of needs, humanistic sort of this person-centered therapy stuff is probably not new to you. You've probably heard it at least in other places. And again, just speaking to the fact that these humanistic ideas have saturated our culture, like they're just part of sort of common knowledge or things that have come up, right? Again, as we talked about in our very first lecture, changing the direction of psychology and some of the sort of the focus onto human strengths and potential, right? We've been people have criticized some areas of psychology as focusing only on like pathology and the stuff that where things go wrong and the things that sort of make or sort of contribute to us doing really horrible things as humans. Humanistic approach, looking at strength and potential, and so a huge impact on some specific areas of psychology. Limitations, though, humanistic perspective built predominantly, so the idea is built on work with relatively high functioning, well adjusted individuals. Okay, and so from a criticism of humanistic approach is saying, okay, well, sometimes people need more than just sort of positive self-regard, positive regard, and sort of a non-judging relationship in order to move past some of their things. If things are going pretty well for the most part, I'm pretty high functioning, yeah, that's good. But if I have some pretty severe pathology, some other things that we need to layer in there too. This humanistic perspective, this idea that all I need to achieve my highest potential is positive interpersonal relationships or having basic needs out of the way, has a hard time addressing sort of more severe behavioral pathologies that we see. Maslow's conceptualization, his model that's built on this idea of self-actualization based on a really small collection of really sort of world-renowned sort of folks. And again, we wonder if, like, can we take sort of the characteristics of this small handful of really exceptional individuals, generalize those to everyone else? So again, some of the same small sample stuff that we've seen as a criticism of some other models. And then sort of this, how do we indicate whether or not someone is self-actualized? The borders on that are super fuzzy. Okay, remember that, again, way back in the beginning, we talked about good research should have a strong operational definition of whatever we're looking at. We should know for this research, what are the things that let us know when we're seeing this phenomenon or we're not seeing this phenomenon? Self-actualization is hard to study because it's supposed to only happen in, like, say, 1% of the population, and Maslow wasn't ever really clear exactly these are the things that would define self-actualization. It's like, oh, it's kind of a general characteristic or combination of all these different things. And so it starts to become hard to study in a replicable way, and so some limitations there. So again, people generally agree that the ideas are good and strong, have been highly influential, but from a research standpoint, some of it starts to get hard to sort of tease apart and tack down in some occasions. Okay. All right. We've got lecture summary. Make sure that you go through, take a look at that. Comprehension check. Make sure you take a look at that. Any questions on the psychodynamic stuff, the humanistic stuff, in terms of sort of perspective of human nature and things that start to impact achievement, stuff like that?
I thought this might be a slight digression, but earlier you were saying in past lectures that humanistic ideologies or whatever aren't really used today.
Not that they're not used. They're hugely used and influential in a number of different areas. In past lecture, talked like the humanistic approach to psychology wasn't as influential as being sort of a major sort of driver of sort of how we understand how people work. In that, like, it's the idea is that it was, supposed to originally, and this is going back beginning of the semester, supposed to supplant psychodynamic approach and behavior approach, particularly in terms of clinical types of work. Huge following within humanistic non-directive treatments, and sort of very, very important. So this idea, Jonathan, that if you were to come to me for treatment, right, and we were working together, in order for that treatment to work, we have to have a good relationship. You have to not believe that you're going to come in and I'm going to judge you or think badly about you, or because then you're not going to tell me stuff that's important for me to go through and help with whatever you're going through and doing, right? We have to have a good relationship, a good therapeutic relationship. And so a lot of these humanistic pieces and parts go into good clinical work. Now, the idea that you're going to achieve maximal outcomes by just sort of non-directive therapy, you just kind of talking to me about what's going on, and sort of I'm serving as a sounding board and things like that. That can be huge. That can be very, very effective in some cases. But let's say you have panic attacks and panic disorder, or if you have OCD, or bipolar disorder, or sort of any number of other specific types of pathologies. Some of the behaviorism, some of the exposures, and some of the other stuff. And so the more directive things start to layer in terms of our best practice evidence-based treatments. And this was the criticism of humanistic approach to treatment, is working with a lot of sort of university students in like the 60s and 70s, right? You think about who went to university in 60s and 70s is some people who were doing pretty well, right? And this isn't to say university students, and sort of including all of you, can't sort of have very, very serious problems. But the criticism was you're already sort of working with a group of relatively high-functioning, exceptional individuals already. Is just this humanistic, non-directive approach, is that going to be effective for the types of folks that sometimes come in with more severe psychopathologies? And so that's kind of the argument for humanistic against humanistic stuff. Does that help clarify things out a little bit? Okay. So again, hugely, hugely important. And again, this is the basis for, a lot of counseling psychology and even sort of some areas of clinical psychology, this non-directive, person-centered approach. And it's a good component. People in sort of clinical science would probably argue, though, that we need some additional stuff above and beyond that. We need that, but needing additional stuff above and beyond for a lot of the types of things that we see.
I had a question, too.
Yeah, Vince.
So how do we define people that fall outside of these humanistic boundaries? So, like, people that don't really care about achievement or consequence or rewards, they're not psychos, but they're just fine with being, like, stagnant. They don't really care about achievement.
Yeah, I guess, and it starts to become hard. Now, maybe from a person-centered approach, from a humanistic approach, Vance, what we might say is that that person is functioning right where they want to be, right? My values are to be, I don't aspire to be Mother Teresa, or I don't aspire to be Einstein. I aspire to just be where I'm at right now, and I'm happy with that. And from a person-centered approach, if you're fine with where you're at, then that's where you're at, and I support you 100%, right? And so there would be that would probably be the approach there. Or if someone says they're fine, but they're obviously sort of not fulfilling sort of certain goals and things like that, we'd say, well, this person maybe hasn't had the circumstances in order to sort of get them motivated to achieve sort of their best sort of self and things. And so that would probably be how we would think about that in terms of the humanistic approach. But as we'll see with a more evidence-based approach to personality, we'd start to say that maybe those folks are a little bit sort of have different personality characteristics that start to make them feel sort of be at different levels. So that's awesome. You just teed me up for the next stuff that we're going to jump into. So thank you for that. All right. Any other questions before we get into trait theory stuff? All right. Cool. So we'll just do a swap-a-roozle here. All right. Going to talk now. The psychodynamic, the humanistic stuff is kind of classic approach to sort of how we identify or sort of think about folks. This last section we're going to go into is going to get into more modern theories of personality and sort of how we think about how sort of these long-lasting trait characteristics start to impact how we sort of go about living our day-to-day life. Okay. So again, if we're thinking about personality, broadly defined as an individual's characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, behaving, how we just generally operate in the world, right? This is kind of how we would define personality, same as before. But with our trait theories, these are our more modern approaches to understanding personality and how it's put together. Trait theories propose that personality is a result of unique combinations of a handful of fundamental dispositions. Okay, so instead of id, ego, superego, sort of necessary and sufficient conditions for growth and relationships and things like that, trait theories say personality is a thing, and personality is just based on some very specific traits. And your personality is some blend of these fundamental dispositions. Okay? But the question is, what are the fundamental dispositions? What are the core components? What are the core aspects of personality, right? And again, if we go through some early work by researchers going through the English dictionary, finding over 18,000 personality descriptors just in the English language, that's a lot. Like, how do we refine this down and say, what are the core components? What are the core elements of personality that blend together to create your individual self, right? And so again, with these trait theories, the core question is, what are the core and fundamental dispositions that make up this personality construct? So we've got a number of different theories, okay? And one of the more influential ones, and this was an early theory that boiled it down, researcher, British psychologist named Hans Eysenck. Eysenck said it came down to three fundamental components of personality. Okay. First component in Eysenck's theory was extroversion. Okay. This idea of extroversion being characterized by individuals who are outgoing, who are sociable, who are kind of bold, and sort of these are, and this may be describe you, or it might be describe people who you know, who are just out there, who are okay, who like to be out and sort of going and just being involved in stuff. Okay. Second component in Eysenck's theory, neuroticism. Okay. Neuroticism is this tendency to be reactive to stress and negative emotion, right? Individuals high in neuroticism, super anxious, things will get them sort of worked up. I'm highly prone to sort of being anxious or reactive to potential threat, negative stuff. If I'm low in neuroticism, easy going, whatever, I'm good with whatever. I'm just able to roll with bad stuff happens. That's cool. Well, it's not great, but sort of whatever. Good stuff happens. That's awesome. I'm cool with that, right? And so sort of this thing about neuroticism is general reactivity to sort of negative affect and emotion. Okay. Last component in Eysenck's Big Three model is psychoticism. Okay. Eysenck identified psychoticism as this tendency towards impulsivity, hostility, sort of this self-centered piece or component of folks, right? So individuals in Eysenck's model who are high in psychoticism are going to be sort of people who are kind of into themselves, kind of impulsive, could be aggressive. People down on the lower end of psychoticism, again, sort of not too focused on themselves, pretty sort of measured in how they're thinking about stuff, low levels of hostilities, things along these lines. Okay. So these were the three core traits that Eysenck said anybody's personality can fundamentally be boiled down to these three individual traits. Yeah. Now, within Eysenck's theory, and this was sort of early, this is sort of beginning of the 20th century, Eysenck is coming down, putting this together. One of the strengths of Eysenck's theory was his effort to tie these personality traits into some biological processes, okay? And what Eysenck proposed was that these three traits of personality are hooked in with your sort of basic central nervous system functioning, or sort of these basic core neural pathways, okay? So the idea was that for extroversion, that extroversion is linked to sort of overall cortical activity. And this is a little bit counterintuitive, okay? So what Eysenck proposed is that people who are low on extroversion, these are people who aren't interested in being out and sort of being around and sort of being exposed to sort of stimulation and danger and things like that, Ising proposed that these are individuals who have higher levels of cortical activity. Okay, if we think about here, all right, let's see if this is that says arousal. All right, and functioning here, right? The idea is that we've got kind of this inverted U shape, okay? As I go forward, right, and my level of sort of baseline cortical arousal increases, okay? If I've got too low cortical activation, what's my functioning? Not good. I need to get sort of up, right? And so as my cortical arousal hits sort of a peak point, say right here, I'm hitting optimal functioning. But if I get too much, go too far the other way, it gets down, okay? Do I have any student athletes in sort of here right now in the audience? No. Anybody who played sports or has played sports sort of semi-competitive? Okay, Cade.
I'm on the track team.
Okay, who's that? Who's that?
Sabrina.
Okay, Sabrina, you're on the track team, right? So you're getting ready. What event do you run?
I'm a hurdler.
You're a hurdler. Okay, so you got getting ready for and wanting to perform your best at a meet, right? If you're sort of laid back and not cranked up or sort of not agitated, you just kind of like as calm as you've ever been and as laid back as you've ever been, are you going to run maybe your best that race?
Probably not.
Probably.
I actually used to run with a girl in high school.
Yeah.
Who would literally show up in her pajamas and take a nap before the race and just show up and not warm up and just run.
Yeah. In a lot of individual differences, but probably not the best strategy for peak performance, right? But on the other end, what if you got yourself so in your head, got yourself worked up, you're cranking up, you're like at a 10, feeling like you're going to vomit before a race. Are you going to run your best there?
No, you normally get a hurdle.
Yeah, right? I'm not a hurdler. I'm not a jumper. I don't jump much over anything, right? But can see then sort of getting in your head being too high, right? Then that's going to be no good. And so what Ising proposed is we've got this sort of best sort of optimal level of cortical functioning, okay? And what Ising proposed is that individuals who are high in or low in extroversion, those folks are going to be hanging out probably just at baseline, maybe like around here, okay? And if I'm already at a high level of baseline cortical activation, so my body's already cranked up enough, just sort of sitting at rest, do I want to go out and do I want to reach out and sort of get external stimulation from folks? No, I don't. I want to be away from people. I'm not interested in going out and doing things because I'm already running at a high level, okay? Extroverts, on the other hand, people who are high in extroversion, Ising proposed that those folks, get out of here thing, that those folks at baseline are running down here, right? If I'm high in extroversion, Ising proposed that my sort of just baseline levels are low, and what I need to do is I need to go out and get stimulation and be sort of interacting with people so that I can go up and hit this sort of optimal peak, okay? And so what's interesting about Ising's theory is that he's making an attempt to tie sort of this personality characteristic of extroversion to sort of baseline physiology. If I'm low in extroversion, that means I'm at baseline and I'm too high. I'm running too hot. I need to stay away from people to get down to that optimal level. If I'm high in extroversion, I'm running too low. My baseline, I just need to go out and get stimulation to bring me up. And so tying extroversion into sort of this baseline levels of cortical activity. Okay, neuroticism in Ising was tied to neural pathways for reward and punishment. Or particularly more on the punishment end. If I'm high in neuroticism, okay, and think about sort of people who you might know, sort of maybe even yourself, right? If you get negative feedback from someone or you get any sort of negative sort of punishment, the likelihood of me doing that again is next to 0, right? Very sensitive to punishment, real or perceived. But if I'm not, if sort of my neural pathways aren't as sensitive to potential punishment, we know people who are like this do the same thing and fail again and again and again and again, or get in trouble again and again and again, and they keep doing it, right? These are probably people who are going to be lower in neuroticism, sort of tying into this neural punishment types of systems, right? And then psychoticism, Eysenck tied in with sort of aggression, fight systems within the body, sort of these things, saying that people who are higher in this going to be higher levels of psychoticism, people who are lower in terms of this natural sort of fight flight sort of type of activation going to be lower in psychoticism. And so again, the one of the strengths of this approach was that Eysenck was trying to tie these characteristics into some biological mechanism. Now, evidence for his theory is very slim, okay? So it doesn't actually look like these things map onto, or these biological systems map onto these personality characteristics as Eysenck thought. But again, sort of this effort to tie personality into some element of biological functioning, right? So to try to give it a mechanism, okay? So some strengths of Eysenck's theory. Again, sort of the first person to come out with a strong theory-based approach to personality. But people have criticized this heavily for saying that personality is too complex. There's so much stuff going on that we can't reduce personality to just 3 fundamental dispositions. We need to have more traits, okay? Also, some concerns with this, what Eysenck called psychoticism. People have made an argument that psychoticism is actually a blend of a bunch of different fundamental traits. Eysenck, the way he was thinking about it, probably better termed as psychopathy or sociopathy as opposed to psychoticism, and some questions whether or not that's a fundamental core piece of human personality. So some criticisms with Eysenck, but again, one of these first trait theories that started to be very influential. Okay. Questions on Eysenck? Okay. So we don't like 3. We want more than 3. Probably the most prominent trait theory of personality today is McRae and Costa's Big 5 trait theory. Okay, and Big 5 keeps extroversion and neuroticism. Extroversion and neuroticism still in the mix. We like extroversion and neuroticism, right? But the Big 5 starts to introduce some additional characteristics or fundamental dispositions. And the first is openness to experience, okay? Openness to experience involves the extent to which individuals are empathic, curious, people who are sort of open to different variety, people who are imaginative, people who are low in openness to experience tend to be more conventional, more traditional. People high in openness are going to be people who tend to have more liberal types of views. People low in openness to experience, generally having a more limited range of interests. I like what I like, and I'm not interested in getting outside of things that I don't like, or sort of getting outside of my bubble. People openness to experience, wanting to be out, sort of going through sort of what's happening. I'm going to go through, and I'm open to trying new things. Okay. Fourth component in the Big 5 is a trait of conscientiousness, okay? Conscientiousness, this has traditionally been called character, okay? It's going to be the extent to which individuals are careful, thoughtful, systematic, dependable, okay? Vance, you were asking about how would humanistic folks talk about people who, are just kind of floating along and not sort of interested in sort of achieving or sort of moving up or doing things like that. They would come up with their theories. From a Big 5 perspective, I would say, well, this is probably someone who is sort of maybe just a little bit low on conscientiousness, right? If I wanted to hire somebody, if I was a manager and wanted to hire somebody for my sort of in my business, I would probably want someone who is high in conscientiousness, right? Someone who's dependable, someone's thoughtful, careful, things along these lines, right? Now, The trick is that these traits aren't good or bad, right? It's not we get too far on either end of this stuff and start to get in trouble. People who are really, really high, overly high in conscientiousness, this is where we get into people who are sort of perfectionists, workaholics, and sort of maybe sort of focus too much on things to the abandonment of other types of stuff. So, I mean, we can get too high in conscientiousness where that might start to get in problems. People low in conscientiousness, these are going to be people who are less goal-oriented. These are people who are going to be more kind of laid back and sort of less focused on driven by success. Like, I'm fine with this, right? I mean, right where I'm at, it might not be good enough for you, but it's fine for me, right? So this is kind of this characteristic of conscientiousness. And the last of the big five is going to be agreeableness. Okay, this agreeableness refers to the extent to which people are empathic, considerate, cooperative, kind. Okay, and so again, this can start to have a sort of value judgment associated with it, right? People high in agreeableness are place a high value on social harmony, right? And think about this, if you maybe yourself or sort of people don't like it if there's conflict. If I'm high in agreeableness, if people aren't getting along, or if I feel like I'm not getting along with people, I don't like that. I want there to be cohesion, right? But the problem with being too high in agreeableness is that sort of maybe sometimes I can be a doormat or get stepped on or sort of things along those lines. We actually find that agreeableness is negatively correlated with effective leadership, right? If I'm a manager of I hired Vance because I want Vance. Vance is high in conscientiousness and coming in. But let's say I sort of also hire Sabrina, and Sabrina's not doing sort of things that Sabrina needs to be doing. I need to be able to say, hey, Sabrina, you need to do what you need to do if I'm going to properly sort of manage that situation, because otherwise I'm not going to be effective in sort of driving stuff, right? So again, some of these characteristics can be seen as sort of having a value attached to them. We want to be careful, though, and sort of recognizing that we can get problems in either direction. Okay. So this is the big five, and what McCrae and Costa's model is saying, and this is probably the biggest, most influential trait theory of personality, is that personality is made of some blend of these five characteristics. Okay, and these five can account for the variability we see in personality. Okay, but again, not without criticisms. Okay, some people will still say these five dimensions are not sufficient to capture the whole range of variability that we see in personality. And so if you go through and look in this area, you'll see big 8 models, big 10 models. It starts to become hard to know sort of when you put the cap on things, but they can get out of control. But the big five has been criticized as sort of not having enough characteristics. Other thing too is McCrae and Costa, in their theory, they say these are the characteristics, but are atheoretical, agnostic on where these come from, right? Eysenck tried to tie in these characteristics to a biological model. McCrae and Costa, the big five, just says these are what they are. We're not worried about where they come from. We're just saying that these are the characteristics that have, and so have been criticized for not having a model to say sort of what's causing differences in these different characteristics. People get an idea on sort of the big five. Questions on this? Okay. Feeling good about that? Thumbs up.
So are all theories
Okay.
criticized as not having enough characteristics?
Yeah. I mean, Colin, and this is why people have developed, the big 8 model, big 10 model. I don't know. It's one of these things, trying to find that balance between how much is enough and how much is just sort of unnecessary parsing of stuff that's better accounted for by bigger theories. And so I think as we're going through all of this and sort of this whole no theory is without criticism. Now, criticism is not necessarily a good criticism. For the most part, this is kind of the model that people have centered about and said, okay, this is probably does a reasonably good job if we're going to approach personality this way. But some people will sort of criticize it for not having enough components, and then that's led to other theories. Other questions?
I do have one.
Yeah.
It's Myers-Briggs.
Uh
I've
huh.
heard of the Myers-Briggs personality, like test and such. Like,
Yeah.
how does that relate to this?
Yeah. The Myers-Briggs sucks. It's one of these things. It's a more of a pop psychology thing, right? Because I find out sort of where I'm at on the Myers-Briggs, and I read it, and I'm like, oh yeah, that really sounds like me. It's kind of like a horoscope, right? I can write things broadly and generally enough, and so I can start to identify. We got a Barnum effect there, right? Like, oh yeah, no, that does characterize me, and think, oh yeah, I'm really that way, right? And so the problem with the Myers-Briggs is it's people, and in like some big important areas, people will use this. The problem is it doesn't map onto research. It doesn't have a good research base. And so it's one of these things. It's sort of like learning styles. Learning styles also aren't a thing. Like people like to think about, I learn things differently. It's a learning style. Learning styles aren't a thing. There's no evidence base to support that type of stuff. But it's something that it resonates with me when I see it. And so I kind of like it. And it's like, oh, I'm this type or this type. People like to be in types. But what we see when we actually look at this stuff is people don't fall into types cleanly. People kind of a blend of different stuff, but it's harder to think about. So I like it if you tell me I'm this type or I'm this type or I'm this type. And so, yeah, that's one of these things that people get really invested in Myers-Briggs, but the research base on Myers-Briggs is not, there's not much there. So apologies to anybody who's really super into Myers-Briggs. What I'll do is I'll send out a link to some of the Big Five stuff. You can do an online quiz that's sort of research-based, and they'll kind of tell you where you score on these different dimensions. It's kind of cool. I'll send that out so you can take a look at it, but a better way to sort of maps better onto sort of evidence that we can get than Myers-Briggs stuff. All right, cool. I don't want to ruin anybody else's dreams, so I'm going to move forward before I can tell you that Santa's not real. All right. Thinking about personality. Again, heritability, stability of personality. Personality, highly heritable, okay? Specific traits when we're looking at that Big Five, because again, the Big Five is kind of the model that we use the most now. It's got a lot of evidence base for it. Heritability of those individual traits, somewhere between 0.4 to 0.6 across twin and adoption studies. And again, if we're looking at individuals from a range of different cultures across the globe, we see some of the same stuff, right? And so who you are, the characteristics and sort of the things that make up your personality, a lot of that is heritable, right? You're not exactly the same people as your family, but there's probably sort of elements of sort of your immediate family that sort of are just kind of part of just kind of how you're wired, right? In terms of personality, levels of extroversion, neuroticism, openness, conscientiousness types of things, okay? And we also see that personality is pretty stable, okay? And it becomes more stable over the course of your lifespan, right? So now the person you are as a middle schooler isn't going to be exactly the person you are as a 30-year-old, right? But there's probably going to be things that are sort of similar in terms of just your general overall levels of sort of extroversion, openness, conscientiousness, things like that, okay? What we see is that as we start to get older, your levels of neuroticism, extroversion, and openness start to decrease during early and middle adulthood, okay? So as you start to transition into your late 20s, early 30s, 40s, right? What we'll probably see is your level of neuroticism probably decrease a little bit. Your level of extroversion probably decrease a little bit. Your openness to experience, you kind of get set in your ways. You kind of settle a little bit, right? Conscientiousness, sort of your ability to sort of be dependable, increases through your 30s. Or increases through your 20s. Agreeableness, as you start getting into your sort of mid, or in your 30s, in your 60s, agreeableness starts to generally increase a little bit, but it's all relative to where you started out, right? We see that these personality characteristics tend to be pretty stable over the course of the lifespan, okay? And again, there's just a big genetic component to this. If I'm born with high levels of neuroticism, right? And I'm just kind of have a predisposition for high levels of neuroticism. Probably that's going to be, I might struggle with negative affect, sort of being sort of kind of on edge and nervous person sort of my whole life. I can sort of do stuff to sort of reduce it down, right, and manage it a little bit. But I'm probably not going to be in the same place or the same thing as extroversion, right? I've got a friend who's high in extroversion. I'm low in extroversion. We're probably never going to be sort of at the same level over the course of our lifespan, but so we see some fluctuations within sort of working with what we're born with here. All right. So the question is then, to what extent does personality start to determine our behavior, right? We have different ways of being in the world, and this is generally what we're talking about in terms of personality. But the question is to what extent does that start to impact our behavior? And what we find is that we do see associations between personality and some types of outcomes. Things like occupational attainment, life satisfaction, relationship stability. Someone tell me, like, why might we see, again, if we're thinking about the big 5 personality traits that we've talked about, why might I expect to see associations between sort of occupational attainment, life satisfaction, relationship stability, stuff like that?
Conscientiousness?
Yeah, okay, exactly, Vance. If I'm high in conscientiousness, I'm probably sort of diligent, I'm reliable, could help me impact my occupational attainment. If I'm not, if I kind of let things drop and it doesn't bother me a whole lot, right, I might not sort of get very far, sort of work up through stuff if I'm low on that, right? What about relationship stability? What might we expect to be associated with relationship stability?
Agreeableness.
Yeah, right. We go through some relationships that have very, very high highs and very, very low lows, right? But in terms of having stable relations, if I'm low in agreeableness, and if you want to fight, I'm fine with fight. Like, I could care less if you're upset or not, right? I don't care. We start to see, and then necessarily not, and same thing at high levels of agreeableness. I might have a very stable relationship that I don't like, but I don't want to say anything and get out of it, and so I'm just sort of in it, right? But we start to see agreeableness maybe start to be associated with that. Life satisfaction, neuroticism is a huge piece of this, right? So I just have a predisposition for negative affect and emotion, right? And so things might be going all right, but I just am not feeling super good about stuff, right? And so we do see personality associated with long-term outcomes, but we see that personality is a very, very poor predictor of behavior in specific situations. Okay, knowing your personality is probably not going to tell me a whole lot about how you might behave in any one given situation. Okay, because the situation matters. We like to think like, I'm an independent person, I do whatever I want when I want. Probably not, right? If you're let's say if I go through and I follow you, right, and you say, like, you go to church services, right, but you're a high extroversion person, right, in the middle of church service, you're probably not going to be talking with other people, right, and sort of making a scene and sort of chatting it up with folks. You're high in extroversion, but the social context of that situation means that, hey, in this situation, I'm supposed to sit here and be quiet and sort of during this, and then afterwards I can talk, right? And so same thing, like you might be, who do I want to pick on right here? Who I'm going to accuse of someone. I'll accuse Brooke. I'll accuse Brooke of being high in aggression, right, and high in Isaac's psychoticism piece, right? But sort of Brooke's degree of aggression probably is going to mean that if she comes in during office hours, she's going to punch me, right? Because there's social things that restrict you might in your head want to punch me, right? But it doesn't impact your behavior, right? And so, I read people saying, I can better predict your behavior at a stoplight by knowing what color the light is than by what your personality is, right? So we see that even though people have wide differences in personality, the situation is a strong predictor of your behavior in any individual situation, okay? And so this leads into our social cognitive perspective, okay? Social cognitive perspective says that our behavior is influenced by the interaction of my personality and the individual situation on its own, okay? And we see this back and forth, right? So if I'm looking at unfamiliar or highly structured situations, okay, if I'm in a situation that's, if let's say I'm in a museum or at a funeral or in sort of class, right? When we used to get together in classes and do things like that, right? Like my personality, sort of where I am, much less influential in these highly structured situations, right? Because we're all playing by the same rules. I might have higher low levels of extroversion, higher low levels of conscientiousness, higher low levels of neuroticism, but the situation is structured in a way that the situation is more gonna determine how I behave relative to my personality. Same thing with an unfamiliar situation, okay? So let's say, Michael, you walk into a situation completely foreign to you, right? How do you know how to behave?
Mainly on how others are acting.
Yeah, I'm going to look around in a situation. I'm going to look at what are other people doing in here, right? And based on if I don't know what's going on, if I'm in an unfamiliar situation, I'm looking around to see what other people are doing and then conduct my behavior to be similar to those folks, okay? But if I am in a unstructured situation, right, that's familiar to me, okay? So let's say, Jacob, you go to a sort of gathering or party or something along those lines, right? So with your bunch of friends, so there's no real structure, people just kind of doing what they're doing. That's probably when your personality and the personality of your friends are going to show up, right? Your friends who are more talkative are going to be more talkative. Your friends who are sort of maybe a little more anxious are going to be sort of a little more anxious. Your folks who are more sort of agreeable are going to want sort of people to agree with them. And the folks who aren't are going to be fine having conflicts and arguments with other people, right? But what we see is this interaction of the situation, the characteristics of the situation being stronger determinants of behavior than the personality, right? We also see that personality starts to become involved in the types of environments that we select, okay? And we see that there's this tendency for individuals with different levels of characteristics to start to influence the types of situations that I find myself in, which then reinforces some of those traits, okay? So I'm trying to go through and say, so I seem, I know what the inside of our dorms look like. Jacob, I'll go back to you just because you have your camera on. I see you appear to be in one of the dorms. Is that correct?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So your first day, again, if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, right? You go in, and Jacob, are you sort of an extroverted person? Yeah, okay. The fact that you have your camera on and you're talking to me right now suggests that sort of maybe you are, right? But, so you're in a new situation. So you go into the dorms, right? And maybe for you, you go through and you start talking with people, right? You start saying, hey, sort of meeting people on your floor and going out, and you find more people to talk to, and then you have more people who know you, which gives you more opportunity to go out and meet people, which sort of impacts your social circle, and it gets bigger and bigger, right? So we got this fulfilling type of thing, okay? Dan, you're in the top of my screen. I see you also in the dorms. Let's say, I don't know if this is true, but let's say you're less extroverted, right? And maybe higher in neuroticism, right? You go into the dorms, new people, meeting new folks, right? But makes you anxious and nervous, right? So maybe you don't go out and meet people to the same extent that Jacob does, right? So what happens? You're in a new place to your social circle. It's smaller. You have less opportunities to go out and interact with people, and so you don't. And so then it just kind of perpetuates down, right? And so what we see is that personality starts to become involved in the selections of our environment, but then that environment that we choose then determines our sort of it's sort of a feed-forward cycle that then strengthens or sort of perhaps strengthens those existing characteristics that we have, right? So people who are, say, high in neuroticism probably aren't going to go out and choose sort of daredevil sort of types of occupations or recreational activities, which they're finding stuff that's going to play it safe, which never gets them exposed to situations that might be a little bit risky, and so you never get comfortable with that, and so you just kind of feed forward with that, versus people who are maybe high in extroversion or sensation seeking, going out, sort of doing sort of thrill seeking stuff. And I didn't die that time, or I got hurt, but it wasn't that bad. I healed up, so I'm just going to keep going through and doing stuff. And so we see with this cognitive, social cognitive perspective, that personality and environment sort of going back and forth and feeding off of each other sort of in any situation. Okay. People kind of get the sort of the idea of this social cognitive perspective. Again, the idea social cognitive perspective isn't saying that the big five is wrong or there's anything wrong with the big five. It's just recognizing that our level of sort of our personality is less predictive of things that I'm doing right now in this instant than maybe sort of my environment around us. So again, really structured in that way. And so recognizing and sort of accounting for some of the limitations of personality and predicting sort of outcomes in different areas. All right. Questions about this? All right. But at the end of the day, if you want to predict future behavior, past behavior in similar situations is the best way to predict future behavior, right? If I know how you behaved in a similar situation in the past, if I have to put money on how you're going to behave in similar situations in the future, looking at that is going to be how I'm going to sort of my best guess for how that person is going to predict in sort of similar situations down the road. Okay, not always. It's not 1-to-1, but if I want to see sort of if I want to know what you're going to do in the future, I should be looking at what you've done in the past, and that's going to give me probably a pretty good sense for what to expect out of any individual in any given situation. In terms of predicting stuff, much better than knowing your level of extroversion or neuroticism or things like that. All right. We've got a couple of other sort of slides here that's just talking about other traits. Go through, take a look at those. Pretty self-explanatory. Myers gets into some of this stuff. We won't worry about it too much here. But do go through and take a look at the lecture summary slides, comprehension check slides. Make sure that you got a handle on that stuff. And if you're good on that, you should be A-OK for Friday. All right. All right, folks. Again, thanks for linking in. If you need to go ahead and take off. But anybody have questions about any of the material, where we're going, anything like that? Feeling good on this? Okay, cool. All right, folks. Well, thank you for linking in. Remember, we've got SI session tonight. We've got review session tomorrow. Wednesday will be the quiz. And then we'll jump into new stuff. I think we got social psychology stuff in the next round, which is going to be interesting. So, awesome. All right, folks. Thanks. Stay warm. And we'll catch you hopefully tomorrow for review. All right. See ya.
Thank you, Professor.
Yep.